Numbers are something you're supposed to watch for trends. One number I'm watching for the same reason is the fact that even though I make a decent salary, I still seem to be struggling paying my rent each and every month. That's something that bothers me, because I feel like I should be fine. I make broke life premium. Where is all this money going? It's getting sucked into a lock between two systems that are designed intentionally to keep your rent at maximum. One is political, one is corporate, and they lock together in a way that makes the whole system almost impossible to break from the inside. Let's start with the political half, because this is the one nobody wants to say out loud. Every few years, a politician runs for office and says they're going to fix the housing crisis. They're going to make housing more affordable. They're going to build more units, reform zoning, bring costs down, and then they get elected and not much changes. Or they don't get elected at all. The reason for that is straightforward once you understand the incentive structure. In the United States, homeowners vote at significantly higher rates than renters. That alone shapes every housing conversation in local and state politics, because politicians pay attention to who shows up at the ballot box. But it goes deeper than that. For the most American homeowners, their home is not just where they live, it is their primary financial asset. It is their retirement. It is generational wealth. It is the thing they are counting on to fund their next stage of life. The median homeowner in this country has a net worth roughly 40 times higher than the median renter. And the majority of that gap comes directly from home equity. Now consider what it actually means to make housing affordable. To bring rent down in a meaningful way, you generally need to do one of two things. You either significantly increase the supply of housing, build a lot more units, allow denser development, or you implement some form of price control. Both of those paths lead to the same destination for existing homeowners: lower property values. If you build 100 new apartments next to an established neighborhood, the value of the single-family homes in that neighborhood tends to soften. If rent caps push down what tenants pay in a building, the investment value of that building falls. Either way, the homeowner's primary financial asset takes a hit. So when a politician proposes serious housing reform, what they're effectively doing is asking their most reliable voting bloc to accept a reduction in their own net worth. Most politicians are not willing to do that because the homeowner voter is the most powerful constituency in local housing politics. They show up, they organize, they call their city council member, they pack the zoning board meeting, and they vote. This is not about individual corruption or bad intentions. It is about a structural misalignment between what renters need and what the people with the most political power need. A falling housing market is not just bad for homeowners, it is political suicide for any official who presides over one. The 2008 financial crisis wiped out trillions in home equity and devastated entire communities. No elected official wants their name anywhere near that. The result is a system biased at every level towards one outcome: protecting and growing home values year over year indefinitely. New housing gets blocked or delayed, zoning laws maintain artificial scarcity, and the cost of renting keeps going up because the people with the power to change it are the same people who benefit most from it staying exactly as it is. That is the political half of the lock. Now let's talk about the corporate half, because this is where it gets genuinely strange. For most of American history, the rental market was managed by what you might call mom-and-pop landlords. Individuals or small families who owned a house or a small apartment building rented it out and managed it personally. They set rent based on what they thought the market would bear. Sometimes they negotiated. Sometimes they gave a long-time tenant a break. Their pricing was human, inconsistent, and often sentimental. That model still exists, but over the last 15 years, a different kind of landlord has steadily been taking over. After the 2008 financial crisis, when millions of homes went into foreclosure and prices cratered, large institutional investors moved in with massive capital and bought properties at scale. Private equity firms, real estate investment trusts, and asset management companies acquired hundreds of thousands of single-family rental homes across the country. By the end of 2023, the 10 largest institutional investors alone owned more than 430,000 single-family rental homes. Some projections suggest that by 2030, Wall Street could control as much as 40% of single-family rentals in the United States. These are not landlords in the traditional sense. They are portfolio managers. Their relationship to the properties they own is financial, not personal. A family living in one of their houses is not a tenant to be accommodated. They are a yield-generating asset to be optimized. And optimizing yield means one thing: making sure rent is always as high as the market will bear all the time. To do that at scale, across tens of thousands of units in dozens of cities simultaneously, these companies needed a tool. And that tool exists. It is called algorithmic rent pricing software, and one company in particular built it into a near monopoly before most people had ever heard of it. The company is called RealPage, and what they built is a software product that takes in rental market data from across an entire city, occupancy rates, lease terms, what competing buildings are charging, and it generates a daily rent recommendation for every unit in every building that uses it. The landlord inputs their data, and the algorithm tells them exactly what to charge. The RealPage sales pitch was simple: stop leaving money on the table. Human property managers are too inconsistent. They negotiate, they get emotionally attached to tenants, they make judgment calls that cost revenue. The algorithm removes all of that. In some markets where RealPage was deployed, rent increases of 14 to 15% within a single year followed. At a real estate conference, a RealPage executive was asked directly if the software was driving those increases. His answer was, and this is documented, "I think it's driving it, quite honestly." Here is where it crosses from aggressive to potentially illegal. RealPage's algorithm doesn't just use a landlord's own internal data, it aggregates pricing and occupancy information across all of its clients, meaning competing landlords are effectively feeding their private data into the same system, and that system is then recommending prices to all of them simultaneously. Independent competitors who would otherwise be driving prices down through competition are instead being coordinated upward by a shared algorithm. Legal experts began describing this as a cartel by software, landlords who are technically competitors behaving as if they agreed on pricing without ever sitting in the same room. The software did the coordination for them. In August 2024, the Department of Justice, along with 8 state attorneys general, filed a civil antitrust lawsuit against RealPage for exactly this. The lawsuit alleged that the software facilitated unlawful price coordination among landlords in violation of federal antitrust law. The lawsuit is ongoing. The scale of the problem becomes clear when you look at market penetration. RealPage's products are currently used to set prices on at least 10% of all rental units in the United States. In multifamily housing, apartment buildings specifically, nearly 1 in 4 units has its rent set by a RealPage algorithm. In cities like Phoenix, RealPage's software was being used in markets covering 70% of available apartment units. In those cities, a renter shopping around for a better deal was almost certainly comparing prices that had been set by the same algorithm. There is one more piece of this that deserves attention. The software was reportedly designed to never recommend that rent go down, even when units sit empty. The standard market logic would be that an empty unit is worse than an occupied one at a lower price. RealPage's algorithm challenged that assumption. It recommended holding prices up and accepting higher vacancy rates, because the revenue from the units that did fill at the elevated price was greater than the revenue lost from the empty ones. The algorithm was not trying to fill your apartment, it was trying to maximize the yield across the entire portfolio.
Now let's look at how these two systems connect. The political half of this story creates scarcity. Zoning laws and building restrictions, shaped by homeowner voters protecting their property values, keep the supply of new housing artificially low relative to demand. There are fewer units available than people who need them. The corporate half exploits that scarcity. When supply is constrained and demand is constant, algorithmic pricing tools can push rents to the absolute ceiling of what the market will bear and hold them there, even when individual units sit empty because the scarcity itself sustains the pricing power. Neither side needs to coordinate with the other. The politician who blocks the new apartment building is not in communication with the asset manager running a RealPage algorithm across town, but the outcome of both of their actions is the same. Rent goes up, stays up, and the renter has no leverage. The politician keeps the scarcity in place to protect homeowner equity. The algorithm extracts maximum revenue from that scarcity to maximize shareholder return. One holds the key, the other turns it, and the lock stays locked. So where does that leave the person on the other side of the door? The honest answer is that the structural forces keeping rent high are genuinely difficult to dislodge, precisely because the people who benefit from the current system are the same people with the most political and economic power. That is not a cynical observation. It is just an accurate description of how the incentives are stacked. But there are cracks forming. The RealPage lawsuit is still moving through the courts, and if the DOJ prevails, it would represent a meaningful precedent that algorithmic price coordination is illegal, regardless of whether humans ever directly communicated. Several cities, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Minneapolis, and others, have already passed local legislation banning the use of algorithmic rent pricing software. Those laws are limited in scope, but they signal that the legal and political conversation around this issue is shifting. On the supply side, a small number of states have begun preempting local zoning restrictions to allow more density near transit corridors. These policies move slowly and face enormous political resistance, but they represent the first serious legislative challenge to the homeowner voter veto on new housing in decades. None of this changes your rent next month, but understanding the structure, the political lock on supply, the algorithmic extraction of every dollar that scarcity allows, changes what you're looking at when that renewal notice lands in your inbox. It's not your landlord being greedy. It's not the market being inefficient. It is two systems built by different people for different reasons, functioning together exactly as designed. The rent doesn't go down because the people with the power to bring it down are the people who need it to stay up. That is not a malfunction. That is the feature. If there's another system quietly running in the background of your life that you want explained, subscribe. New video every week.